welcome to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Drone and missile strikes reported in Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk and Kharkiv overnight. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko says Russia has started to transfer some tactical nuclear weapons to his country. Plus, U.S. condemns Russia-Belarus nuclear agreement, sees no change to nuclear posture. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Ukrainian Air Force say a series of drone and missile strikes rained down across Ukraine, and in particular the Kyiv and Dnipropetrovsk region overnight. Now, the Air Force said the attacks began at about 10 p.m. Thursday night, and the last one was reported at 5 a.m. this morning. The command reported 17 cruise missiles and 31 attack drones, and noted that there were strikes in Dnipro and Kharkiv regions using S-300, S-400 missile systems. In the southeastern city of Dnipro, the head of the regional military administration said 5 cruise missiles and 6 Shahed drones were downed by Ukrainian forces. An explosion was heard in the Russian city of Krasnodar in the early hours of today. According to the Russian state news agency TASS and RIA Novosti, citing the operational headquarters of Krasnodar territory, the roof and windows of a building in Morskaya Street had been damaged. Social media posts show what appears to be an unmanned aerial vehicle in the sky, followed by the sound of an explosion. Other social media images show smoke rising from the building, and another image shows the building damaged. Emergency services were sent to the scene. However, no casualties have been reported so far. In the meantime, Russia and Ukraine have both claimed to have launched more attacks on each other's military equipment and other targets in multiple locations. The Russian Defense Ministry has said the Russian forces have launched offensives in areas including Kharkov, Krasny Liman, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, adding that they used high-precision weapons to strike down targets such as Ukrainian armored vehicles, artillery, and arsenal. The air defense system also intercepted multiple Ukrainian rockets and shot down drones from the Ukraine side. For the Ukrainian side, the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces say the Ukrainian Air Force, missile and artillery units carried out airstrikes on Russian military personnel and equipment, assembly stations, ammunition depots, radars, and other targets. Russian Security Council Deputy Chairman and former President Dmitry Medvedev said Russia would launch a preemptive nuclear strike if the West provided Ukraine with nuclear weapons. Speaking to reporters while on a trip to Vietnam, Mr. Medvedev said in his words, "In case the West provided Ukraine with the nuclear weapon, we will have to make a preemptive strike." He warned the more destructive the weapons supplied to Kyiv, the more likely a nuclear apocalypse scenario. He noted the Anglo-Saxons are not fully aware of this and believe it'll not come to this, adding that it'll come under certain conditions. Meanwhile, Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko said the transfer of some tactical nuclear weapons from Russia to Belarus has begun. President Lukashenko said, in his words, it was necessary to prepare storage sites. And so on, we did all this. Therefore, the movement of nuclear weapons began. President Lukashenko also promised the safety of tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, saying, "Don't worry about nuclear weapons. We are responsible for this. These are serious issues. everything will be all right here. This comes after Moscow and Minsk signed an agreement on deploying tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, one of Russia's neighbors and most loyal allies. Lukashenko raised the possibility of Russia placing strategic nuclear weapons in Belarus during a national address in March, while baselessly accusing Western countries of preparing to invade Belarus and destroy it. Meanwhile, as expected, the United States has strongly condemned an agreement for Russia to deploy tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus, but had not seen any reason to adjust its nuclear posture. Speaking to reporters, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller said Washington had also not seen any indication Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon.
Preparing to use a nuclear weapon. I would say that we strongly condemn the arrangement. It's the latest example of irresponsible behavior that we have seen from Russia since its full-scale invasion of Ukraine over a year ago. As we have made clear, the use of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons in this conflict would be met with severe consequences. But in response to this report, I will just add we have seen no reason to adjust our strategic nuclear posture or any indications that Russia is preparing to use a nuclear weapon.
Meanwhile, the White House said it has seen reports that Russia has moved ahead with plans to deploy these tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Speaking to a regular press briefing, the White House spokesperson Karine Jean-Pierre said Russia's move is an example of making irresponsible and provocative choices.
So look, we've seen the report of Russia-Belarus arrangement and we'll continue to monitor certainly the implications here. We have not seen any reason to adjust our own nuclear posture. You've heard us say that before, nor any indications Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons for Belarus. Speaking to that particular issue, this is yet another example of making irresponsible and provocative choices. So we remain committed to collective defense of the NATO alliance, and I'll just leave it there.
Now, I would like to speak with Barrister Chukwuemeka Eze, who is joining us from Enugu, I believe. Good morning to you, and thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Barrister, the man called Robert Oppenheimer, credited to be the father of the atom bomb and the creator of the one that was dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, following that successful mission, said that he felt, to President Harry Truman, that he felt he had blood on his hands because it was a technology that he spearheaded in that group of nuclear physicists that brought about the atom bomb. And now we are seeing Medvedev, a Putin loyalist, saying that nuclear warfare is possible in this case. He said, in his words, under certain conditions. Is Medvedev just saber rattling?
I don't think that nuclear weapons will be used in this war, but it is a tactical move by Russia, and they are just showing that they are prepared. But I don't think that the United States will use nuclear weapon if the United States of America is not directly attacked. So I don't foresee the West using nuclear weapons for this war. But one cannot rule out the use of biological and chemical weapons. If the push comes to the shove, the Putin is showing from everything, the whole circumstances, that he is not playing. This is war, and he's ready to do the needful to ensure that Russia is not defeated. It is very difficult to defeat in nuclear power. And that's why I've always said from day one that Russia will not be defeated in this war. So I'm not afraid, I'm not sure that nuclear weapons will ever be used in this war. But it is necessary for Russia and Belarus, whether by propaganda or otherwise, to get prepared so that the West will know that, oh, we are not joking in this matter. Just like the Belarusian president said, Lukashenko, that this is war, it's a serious matter.
It started with the expression of intent by Russia and Belarus for those who say Russia is the boy crying wolf. But now it has gone ahead to some legislation that happened in Belarus for these weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, to begin to be lodged there. If we're saying that this cannot happen because it's so outlandish, it's so preposterous, this move by Russia, what message does this send? I know you've mentioned something, but could you expound further on whether, if push indeed does come to shove, Russia will do this?
I think it is an act of deterrence in war. You just have to show your full might so that your enemy will know how far you can go. So basically, I don't see Russia using the nuclear weapons because they have not even exhausted all their weapons. They have not exhausted their biological weapons. They have not exhausted their chemical weapons. So why use nuclear weapons? To obliterate Ukraine? And there is no way you bomb Ukraine without some communities or some regions within Ukraine that are in the hands of Russia will not be affected.
You bring up...
nuclear weapon is not something that
Go ahead.
That will affect only 1 kilometer, 10 kilometers. This weapon, if used, will definitely affect as long as 50 kilometers, or even 100 or 200. So I think the world will not allow a situation. There are the 6 African countries trying to speak to Ukraine and Russia, and other countries definitely they know the implication of using nuclear weapons. So I'm not afraid for now. We've not gotten to that point. The movement of tactical nuclear weapons can take place between Russia and Belarus, but that is not conclusive of issues. Its deployment is one thing, its use is another. So they are just getting close for Ukraine to know, oh, we are near your borders. So please don't play with us. If you play with us, it's an act of deterrence, and it should be seen in that perspective for now. And you can see that U.S. has said that it has not changed this posture with respect to its own nuclear weapons. So I don't think for now there is much to fear, but there should be move to end this war because this war is escalating and has taken different dimensions. It is becoming more and more globalized by the day. You are aware the other day that Zelensky addressed the Arab world. He also addressed the G7 in Japan. So basically, everybody is feeling the heat. So it is time they begin to consider to end the war. How it will go, I don't know, but in the current position, I think the parties are still ready to fight, and fight more.
For all our sakes, we hope that you are correct in assuming that deployment of nuclear weapons will not happen. But you bring up an equally scary proposition when you mentioned biological and chemical weapons. We know that there are many ethnic Russians in Ukraine, and there's, from the last 2 weeks now to the month, there's been continuous talk about weapons. Let's talk much less about mediation. You know, obviously, the Ukrainians are arming themselves and getting promises from their allies to increase their weapons, their arsenal, because you don't obviously bring a knife to a gunfight with the military capabilities of Russia. What is your opinion on Ukraine's position currently now of consistently trying to arm itself with more sophisticated weapons?
I sympathize with Ukraine because Ukraine is like a beggar asking for weapons. You don't know when those weapons will come. Russia need not ask for weapons to continue the war. You have seen what has happened in Bakhmut. Ukraine continued to say we are gaining ground, we are gaining ground. The propaganda continued until the Wagner group overwhelmed Bakhmut. So we don't know the next region that Russia will overwhelm. So Ukraine will wait for weapons, and they are losing lots of soldiers, and I think more than even Russia. So when they get all those weapons, who are those that will fight the war? So Ukraine is pushed to the wall, and the ability to continue with the war will depend on continuous supply of weapons. And this is not guaranteed, because when they get these promises, you don't know whether they will get the weapons that will be sufficient to match the Russians within a month, within 2 months, within 3 months. And the Russians are marching on, notwithstanding the interference in Belgorod. That's a border town to Ukraine, inside Russia. You are aware that the Free Russian Legion and the Russian Free Russia Corps, the Russian Freedom Corps, the two entities, non-governmental bodies, are fighting, paramilitary bodies, and Russia calls them Ukrainian militants. So they are doing their best along the border. So the thing is escalating. I doubt whether these weapons, we accept they come early, they may not be able to help Ukraine. Recall that Ukraine has a border with Belarus, and Ukraine has a border with Hungary. And these two countries are hostile to Ukraine. So both of them are supporting Russia. So you never know where Russia could come from. Does Ukraine have sufficient equipment to match Russia when coming from Belarus, coming from Belgorod, coming from Donbass, coming from Luhansk, and others, including Kharkiv, Mariupol? So including the air bombardments is quite overwhelming. So I really sympathize with Ukraine, because the equipment we are talking about, they don't have sufficiency. So it will come from other nations. Those nations have been making statements, making pronouncements to the effect that they will continue to back Ukraine. But remember, it is dependent on certain domestic issues. If elections are held in some of these countries, and the parties that win are opposed to the war, definitely they won't be in a position to continue to supply Ukraine. They're receiving internal schism in the United States of America, where some people believe that a lot of taxpayers' money is going into the Ukrainian war. So nobody knows to what extent that Ukraine can hold out in this war. But for now, I know that mediation is going on underground or behind the scenes. But whether the mediation is sufficient enough to make impact is what I don't really know. But definitely, as we speak now, mediation is going on behind the scenes. But the parties are still warmongering. So I think they will still need to fight the war for a little longer time before they will be serious with negotiation and mediation.
Can it be surmised that the reason why this counteroffensive that Ukraine has been championing for weeks now, running into months now, hasn't occurred because they are still training their forces? Because obviously these weapons, we know that without training, even the Leopard tanks, not to talk of the expected F-16 fighter jets, need proper training for it to work, the Patriot system that they're using. Vis-a-vis Russia and the fact that they're already a military power, even though they're having to rely on conscripts and what have you, Ukraine have a much smaller population. How much of a factor do you think military strategy will help in Ukraine defeating Russia or pushing them back, as opposed to brute force or the deployment of weapons, for which you give me your opinion, they're not ready to use yet?
In my opinion, Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. I've said it before that the best that Ukraine can do is to recover some or all of its territories. Ukraine cannot defeat Russia. It will not happen. So that is one. And besides being my opinion, I've listened to the interview of Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary.
Yeah.
He is of the same opinion. So if you look into history, you will discover that it is impractical. So we're talking about the counteroffensive. So much has been said about this anticipated counteroffensive. But let us look at it more practically. When you are doing counteroffensive, you have the air power. When you move your forces towards the front lines, and Russia comes in with both land power and air power, how can the soldiers overcome these Russians, the Russian soldiers? How can they move forward when they are being attacked from the air and from the ground? Ukraine doesn't have such air power to carry out a very successful counteroffensive. Assuming it has, yes, it will be understood that it can carry out successfully a counteroffensive. So one thing is carrying out the counteroffensive, but the outcome might be suicidal. And concerning the F-16s that they have been promised, it will take time to train the pilots. It will also take time for them to use it. So if they are waiting for the F-16s, they have to wait for months. And that means the counteroffensive will not take place soon. And if they carry it out now, the casualty will be very high. So my opinion is that the counteroffensive on paper can be carried out, but the success is remote, is quite remote, because Russia will do everything to combine both guerrilla, frontal attack, air power. They will use everything, artillery, tanks, whatever you may call it. So at the end of the day, the casualties on the Ukrainian side will be enormous. So, and that's why you can see the counteroffensive has not taken place. Because when they do their calculations, they discover that they need to wait a little longer before they can carry it out. So that's my opinion that the counteroffensive is necessary. They insist on, or they are ready to get back some of their territories. But to get it and withhold it and stay there, ensuring that the Russians do not come back, is a tall order. It is quite taskful. And Ukraine will need to get more weapons to be able to accomplish this.
Why then, Barrister Eze, do you think people there are certain schools of thought that are saying that because this battle is long drawn out and Russia has not met its expected military targets at this point, over 450 plus days into this conflict, that Russia has essentially lost the war? Why are people saying that?
I don't belong to that school of thought. No, I don't agree. Russia has substantially met its targets. So let's leave propaganda. There are so many places Russia is controlling. Look at the grain deal. If Russia says no, that it will not proceed, that will be the end. So Russia has substantially gained ground in Ukraine. At least 1/3 of Ukraine is in Russia's hands now. So how is it that Russia has not met its target? The only thing is that the period that Russia thought they could use in meeting that target has been extended. So it's a matter of duration. They have not met the target in terms of duration, but in terms of goal, in terms of objective, they have substantially done so. They have also used the war in Ukraine to test many of their weapons. They have also used the war in Ukraine to organize what they call a multipolar world order. You can see many countries are discussing the dollarization now. Many
Yes.
countries want to leave the American influence. This war has substantially created a schism between those who are opposed to the United States and those that are in their support. So we are returning to the days of not just Cold War, but hot war. So maybe we'll move from hot war to Cold War. But the stratification of the war as whether you are supporting Ukraine or against Ukraine, Russia has succeeded. Russia has succeeded in promoting the yuan, the Chinese currency. Many contracts are now uh, executed pursuant to the yuan and not the dollars. So this war has Putin, his goal for the war is to give America a bloodied nose. And I think to a large extent, Putin is succeeding, but until the war ends, before we count the costs, both sides are getting the hit. And I think Russia has, to a large extent, succeeded. Russia is not a world power in vain. Russia is not a permanent member of the United Nations for nothing. There is a reason why 5 countries were chosen to be permanent members of the United Nations. They have paid their dues, and it will be very difficult to conquer any of those 5 nations. United States, Russia, France, Britain, and China. So Russia, forget about defeat. The only thing is how many people will die before the war ends. That is what nobody is sure of. But as for defeat, then we should put it aside. No nuclear power will easily be defeated unless you bomb their nuclear arsenals and extinguish them completely so that they don't have nuclear weapons to use in the course of the war. So I
Yes.
don't think Russia has not met its goals. It has.
Barrister
It
Eze,
has. But
yes, Barrister
thank
Eze,
you.
we pray that these
Yes.
numbers of fatalities will be in the lowest possible. But finally, to ask you, and you brought up Hungary and Viktor Orban, and you also brought up the African Peace Mission. We know that the Chinese envoy is in the area going to both sides to see what he can do for a peace plan to come to pass. But as far as mediation efforts go, knowing that a country like Hungary, you say they're totally pro-Russian, some say they're going the middle road, but behind the scenes they are pro-Russian. Countries like Hungary, countries like Denmark or Sweden who are anti-Russian for this purpose, how much of a role do you think these countries are playing in either instigating this war by default in not supporting mediation or by sitting on the fence by default as well, causing this war to proceed without proper mediation from these countries that can be influential, not to talk of Brazil, not to talk of India, not to talk of Israel, who are very quiet right now, and not even to talk of the African Peace Mission. So finally, can you give us an overview of how you think these nations are doing to help to speak to both sides, to bring them back to the negotiating table?
I think these nations, some of the ones you have mentioned, they don't have the capacity to influence what is happening. But those that have the capacity to influence what is happening, they are having a complicated situation in their hands. Because by the time you bring the mediation terms to the table, do you want Russia, after fighting a war and losing thousands of soldiers, to quietly leave the whole of Ukraine? A war started in 2014 by the annexation of Crimea. Do you want Russia to leave Crimea, where it has moved from being a tenant to a landlord, and where its Naval Fifth Fleet is existing and located. So will your mediation be that that Ukraine be bifurcated? So will Ukraine accept the bifurcation of its territory? What happens to the principle or doctrine of sovereignty as provided in Article 2 of the United Nations Charter? And the catch 22 there is, if you are a country and you accept that Ukraine should lose part of its territory, you will be creating a precedent in international law. Remember when Russia intervened in Georgia, it compelled or forced, through use of force, for Abkhazia and Ossetia to become semi-independent or independent territories from Georgia. Even though by the principle of recognition in international law, Abkhazia and Ossetia are not recognized, but Russia treats them as separate entities from Georgia. So you discover that it will be difficult to mediate upon this matter, because if you come around to say Ukraine should lose its sovereignty and allow 5 regions to be taken over by Russia, Ukraine will not accept that. So whether it is said by Hungary or said by Israel or said by India or Brazil, this will not happen, except if they are defeated in war or they surrender. That is the only way Russia will completely have its way. But as long as they have weapons and they have soldiers to fight, they will not accept mediation to lose its territory. I think what some mediators are considering is to allow Russia to have Crimea and leave other territories like Luhansk, Donbass. But Russia, the amount of investment they have made since they took over these regions, I doubt whether Russia will allow these entities, these territories, these regions to go. So it's a very difficult situation, because if it was diplomacy at work prior to the war, I mean, it would have been easy to negotiate. But if you tell Russia to completely leave it, Russia will take it that you are siding Ukraine. If you tell Ukraine to leave their territories in the hands of Russia forever and ever, but
Thank you.
you know that Russia, all right, thank you.
Yeah, Paris Eze, thank you so much for your submission. What, therefore, does former President Donald Trump know that we don't? Because he says that he says in 24 hours it's done, that war is over. What do you think he knows that we don't know? It appears we're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
I know what Trump will do. If Trump wins the next election, he will succumb to Russia that a part of Ukraine, perhaps not the whole place. He will negotiate that maybe Russia should have Crimea and withdraw from the other. And he will announce it and totally withdraw from this supporting Ukraine if Ukraine refuses. So he will take a very hard stance. And once America takes that position, then the foundation, the background of NATO support will collapse. France, Britain, and other countries wouldn't want to be funding it without American support. So I know what Trump will do if he becomes the president. Within 24 hours, he will call Putin and negotiate the parts of the territories of Ukraine to be allowed, that Russia should be allowed to take ad infinitum. And once he does that, he will give his conditions to Ukraine. You either accept it. If you don't accept it, we withdraw American support. And once Putin accepts that condition, and I know that Putin is favorably disposed to Trump. If he accepts that condition, that will be the end of the war, or we'll be approaching the end of the war.
Barrister Chukwuemeka Eze, thank you so much for your perspective Always appreciated.
Thank you very much.
He joined us from Enugu. And after the break, act of goodwill, Ukraine secures release of 106 hero soldiers in swap with Russia. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. The United States has long asked Ukraine not to use U.S.-provided military equipment to carry out attacks inside Russian territory. That's according to top U.S. generals, following accusations pro-Ukrainian military use U.S. armored vehicles. The Army General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said his office was looking into imagery showing the vehicles allegedly used in an attack in the Russian border region of Volgograd, but he says the U.S. position against such U.S. equipment being used inside Russia was clear to Kyiv. Now, on the other hand, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Denmark and the Netherlands have decided to lead a European coalition in providing F-16 training for Ukrainian forces.
Rules that we have established with the Ukrainians is to not use U.S.-supplied equipment to attack into the geographic space of Russia. And look, they're a country at war. It's an existential threat. They're fighting for their survival. I can't say with definitive accuracy right this minute to you whether that, and I saw the same videos, whether that's U.S.-supplied equipment or not, what was the nature of the attack, who did what to whom. I can't say that with definitiveness right this minute. But I can say that we have asked the Ukrainians not to use U.S.-supplied equipment for direct attacks into Russia. Why is that? Because we don't want, this is a Ukrainian war. It is not a war between the United States and Russia. It's not a war between NATO and Russia. This is a war between Ukraine and Russia, and we are supporting and supplying and help training and advising and assisting Ukraine. But it is not a direct conflict between the United States and Russia.
And during today's meeting, several allies and partners also discussed plans for training Ukrainian pilots on fourth-generation fighter aircraft, including the F-16. And planning and executing this training will be a significant undertaking, but the coordination of this contact group will help make that possible. And I especially want to thank Denmark and the Netherlands, which have decided to lead a European coalition in providing F-16 training for Ukrainian forces.
F-16s, there's no magic weapons in war. And sometimes certain things get labeled as, this is going to be the magic weapon. There are no magic weapons. An F-16 is not, neither is anything else. And as we look at what the problem to be solved in at the beginning of this war, it was a defensive fight against mechanized armored forces, Russian forces that were coming across the border. What do you need for that? You need anti-armor weapons. You need lots of them. And you had to keep the airspace clear of Russian close air support that would enable Russian ground maneuver. And that's exactly what was provided. So it's not a question of we agree later or agree now or under pressure. That's not at all what's getting done here. This is hardcore military analysis that looks at cost, benefit, and risk, and what is the need on the battlefield now and in the near future.
Back on the battlefield, the head of Russia's Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, says he's sending back the bodies of a U.S. citizen who was killed in the fighting in the Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, and that of a Turkish citizen who was found dead in a blown-up building. Mercenaries from Russia's Wagner Group were shown in a video clip nearly enclosed the two wooden coffins and then draping a U.S. Stars and Stripes flag over one coffin and the red banner flag of Turkey on the other. The U.S. citizen perished in fighting in a part of Bakhmut known as the Nest, while the Turk was found dead, along with a Turkish woman, in the remains of a building blown up by Ukrainian forces. However, Prigozhin says the Turkish woman's body could not be recovered. Meanwhile, Russia's Wagner private army has exchanged prisoners of war with Ukraine and released a video and drone shots showing men in uniform being passed from one side to the other in an unidentified location. Founder of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is seen in the video addressing the returning Russian soldiers. It appears that amongst them are fighters of the Wagner Group, officers of the Rosgvardia, and one fighter of the Akhmat unit. Wagner played a key role in Russia's month-long onslaught in the city of Bakhmut, where both sides likened the ferocious fighting to a meat grinder. In the meantime, Ukrainian authorities say Kyiv has secured the release of 106 captured soldiers in a prisoner exchange with Russia. The soldiers, including 8 officers, were captured fighting in the devastated eastern city of Bakhmut that Russia says it has captured, but where Kyiv's forces say they still have a small foothold. Coordination Headquarters for the Treatment of Prisoners of War released more videos showing Ukrainian soldiers driving a top infantry fighting vehicle with white flags. President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, also confirmed the exchange. Ukrainian military intelligence says that 2,430 Ukrainians have been freed in prisoner swaps, including 139 civilians. We're also learning that Japan has just announced it will impose further sanctions on Russia after the group of 7 nations agreed last week at the Hiroshima summit to step up measures to punish Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. The chief cabinet secretary, Hirokazu Matsuno, Tokyo's top government spokesperson, condemned Russia's move to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus, saying it would further intensify situations around the invasion of Ukraine. According to a foreign ministry statement, in a coordinated action with G7, Japan will freeze assets of about 78 groups and 17 individuals, including army officers in Russia, and ban exports to 80 Russian entities, such as the military-affiliated research labs. A trade ministry statement said Japan will also ban providing construction and engineering services to Russia, although the details of the measure will be announced at a later date. And now we are going to turn our attention to how the conflict is affected by business and how business is affecting the conflict in Ukraine and Russia. Joining me is Laddie Williams, our business correspondent. Laddie, good morning.
Good morning.
Laddie, I know one of our talking points is Germany and Europe's largest economy hits a recession.
Yeah.
Now, this is with the fact that Germany is one of the hardline nations against Russia.
Right.
And they have committed money, they've committed measures, they've committed a policy
Right.
in favor of Ukraine.
Yeah.
How is this going to affect the support for the war? Or could you tell us how the business perspective occurred where
Yeah.
it's hitting a recession?
Yeah, it's a tough one.
Does this have anything to do with their Ukrainian support?
Oh, yes, it has a lot to do with it because when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, we did have that whole gas issue, turning off, the gas supplies from Russia to Germany. They did turn off the taps. That's Russia. And the forecast was that Germany was going to definitely get into a recession because they needed all of that gas and energy to power their manufacturing because they're a heavy exporter economy. They're a heavily export-dependent economy, talking about Germany, and that's the largest economy in Europe. And after that incident there, they had to stock up their reserves, talking about gas. We did see gas prices hit over $10 from about $2. Now, we've seen natural gas prices fall back to around $2 right now from those highs. So you would expect, gas prices have come down. They've kicked off the industries have kicked off again. So you'd expect at least at this point, they should have growth, instead of a back-to-back depressed growth at this time. That's what's termed a recession, and that's what we're seeing. In 2022, fourth quarter, the economy contracted by about 0.5%. Then first quarter of 2023, we have 0.3%. So that's quarter-on-quarter contraction, which shows a recession. And, the consensus was that Germany was going to enter a recession. But, after a while, we saw that they were able to manage, the winter wasn't as cold as everyone anticipated. They had their reserves stocked up by 100%. So they should have growth. But because of soaring inflation, we've seen top economies battle inflation. We've seen prices skyrocket from eggs. Food inflation is at an all-time high at this point. So that has brought consumers to their knees, at this point in Europe's biggest economy. So that's why we're still seeing that they still entered a recession, despite energy prices coming down, even though we're seeing inflation slowing. Well, we know central bankers have been, battling inflation, raising rates to highs we've not seen before. And when a central bank starts to raise rates, they're doing that at the expense of growth. So we're already seeing the impact of all those rate hikes now with this recession we see quarter on quarter in Germany.
Do you think it's going to get worse as they continue to support Ukraine? For instance, if they wean themselves off Russian gas, as they've done of Russian oil?
Right, because they've been able to manage, without Russian gas at this point. But at the end of the day, the forecast we're seeing from IMF is that Germany and Britain are going to enter a recession in 2023. Because at the end of the day, we still see that inflation is still high at this point. They're still trying to ramp up more sanctions on Russia, trying to, defund Russia so they're not able to fund the war. And the funny thing about it is, because of globalization, when you sanction one country, somehow it comes back to bite you, because at the end of the day, we're seeing...
We're a global village.
We're a global village. So it impacts everyone. That's why we all hope that the war ends, because, we cannot rely on sanctions, because the sanctions, at the end of the day, even though it impacts Russia, finds its way to, in fact, impact the global economy.
Russia is mighty peeved, I expect, because they're signaling an end to the Black Sea grain deal in July. Is that the end of the 2 months that they gave?
So the 2 months is still in place, at this point. But now they're fast forward now to the next one, which is in July. They're supposed to renew the deal again, and they are signaling again their demands. They did have demands in March, about most especially their fertilizer. They're trying to get the supply, the pipeline running of ammonia to the global markets, because that pipeline, connects to the Black Sea port, which has been, shut off because of sanctions. So they need that pipeline working again so they can get the ammonia out to the global markets. That's one of their, big demands at this point. They need to get their exports out.
What does the U.S. mean then when they're saying that Russia has everything that they need? That why are they complaining?
So,
that's what the United States is saying.
Yeah, the United States will say that because at the end of the day, they're trying to defund, Russia. So at the end of the day, Russia says, okay, fine, our exports and our agricultural exports are not sanctioned, but the process of getting our exports out of Russia, that's where because if okay, fine, you don't sanction my exports, but the way for me to get my exports out of the country, those paths are sanctioned, so I cannot get my products out. So that's what Russia is saying at this point, and obviously it's a hard one, because we need this deal renewed, because if this deal is not renewed, there is that risk of global hunger, because a lot of countries depend on Russia and Ukraine for these grains. So if the deal, it's like choosing between the devil and the deep blue sea at this point, because at the end of the day, you're trying to not allow Russia make money from their exports, but at the same time, You're trying to get this deal, Black Sea grain deal going. So how do you choose which one to let go of? So
Deep blue sea.
Yeah.
Any time of the day.
Exactly. So it's a really tough
25 hours a day, 8 days a week.
Big headache, trying to figure out these sanctions.
Thank you, Laddie. And Laddie will be with us on the channel on Business Morning, so please stay tuned for that. Laddie Williams,
Fantastic.
business correspondent.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laddie. Now, finally on the program, dozens of students of the Republican Cossack Cadet Corps, named after Air Marshal Alexander Yefimov, took part in a graduation ceremony in the Russian-controlled city of Luhansk in eastern Ukraine. Attending were Russian State Duma deputy and member of the General Council of United Russia ruling party Viktor Vodolatsky, parents as well as guests. Now, some of the cadets said they will continue their military education in different Russian institutions. City of Luhansk is in eastern Ukraine, around 30 kilometers from the border with Russia and 100 kilometers from the front line. In September 2022, Russia, amidst an ongoing military conflict in Ukraine, unilaterally declared the annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions: Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia. And that's where we leave it on today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Do have a great weekend. See you on Monday.